So today we're going to go over the handstand walk. I'm just going to go over a couple of my favorite cues to actually basically kickstart people into getting their first handstand walk. But also if they already have handstand walks, but they just know that it only takes a couple steps before they actually get knocked down or they have to come down, then these cues can be very, very helpful to keep them going right past that 5 foot, 10 foot, 15 foot mark. Okay, so first and foremost, simplest one of them all is hands turned out. Okay, so you'll notice, especially when CrossFit Games athletes do this, like most of them do it this way, where their hands are turned slightly outwards. And my personal opinion on this, or why this is the case, most of the time at least, is if your fingers are pointed straight ahead. So if my fingers are pointing straight ahead, I'm very limited on my wrist extension. So if have my fingers pointed straight ahead like this, and I'm trying to walk, right, the whole time, I'm fighting against my wrist extension, which makes it very, very challenging for me to keep moving forward continuously and having my hips right ahead of my hands, because they're always kind of being pushed back just by my wrists alone, right? So I always tell people keep your hands pointed outwards, which is very, very helpful. Cue number 2 is always press through the shoulder blades. So what I mean by this is sometimes I see people when they're handstand walking or trying to handstand walk, they are trying to bend the elbows, right? They're not really that focused on their shoulder blades. So what I usually tell people is like focus on as if you were kind of walking on stilts. So you had no elbows, right? Your elbows are completely extended the whole time. And all I'm doing is just walking, right? By essentially protracting my shoulder blades or elevating my shoulder blades and pushing through the ground, keep my elbows nice and straight, obviously, and then retracting on the other side, right? So pulling my shoulder blades down on the other side and then pushing up on the other side, and then just moving it back and forth between that motion, and obviously moving one hand in front of the other. Okay, on top of that, it would be very, very small steps. So since I'm kind of thinking about walking on stilts, I shouldn't be able to take super big steps. So the goal is basically one hand in front of the other, like very, very small steps, so that I'm kind of shuffling my way along, and which helps me move slower, which helps me have more room for error, essentially. So if I begin to kind of loosen up in the core, which I'll talk about in a second, or my legs kind of sway from side to side, then I'll be able to save it because I'm moving on a slower cadence, right? But the faster you move, it's harder to save yourself when you do kind of get out of rhythm or out of cadence, because you're moving a lot faster, right? So you have less time to think, essentially. And then very common cue, but sometimes very, very overlooked, is just keeping tension through the abs and glutes, right? So just the whole midline. We want to keep tension, because the more tension we have to the midline, the more I'll be able to actually control my legs. I'm trying to not get them to sway from side to side, right? So I'm going to try to show an example of this as best I can, at least. But if I stay loose through the core, I'm going to purposely kind of throw my legs to the side, and you'll see that I'm not going to be able to save it, because, again, my abs aren't tight, my glutes aren't squeezed, so it's way easier for my legs to kind of go wherever they want to go. Okay, so here's an example, right? Where my legs start to go to the side, and then it's gonna be super hard for me to save that because I wasn't active to the core from the get-go, and so I get knocked off to the side. So those are my 3 favorite cues I like to use. Again, hands turned out, right? So not fingertips ahead, but fingertips out to the side. Pushing through the shoulder blades in small, subtle steps, and then keeping the midline engaged the entire time as I go throughout it. So that is the handstand walk. If you have any questions at all, let me know. Try those cues out and see what you think.